There we go. Bam. Go ahead and start us off, Will. This
All
is
right, this is
Wilfred Reilly.
Wilfred Reilly live on the Break It Down show with Pete Turner. Glad to be back.
Yeah, man. We have both grown to the point where we're both so busy we don't get to do this as often as we used to, and that's a shame because well, it's good that we're busy and advancing in other ways, but yeah, I miss being able to hang out and talk with you.
For sure, for sure. Yeah.
We um, we know so this is I'll start this thing. We know that during the Hamas Israel war, a lot of lying was going on. And I'll just pick on the New York Times here. They routinely cited the Hamas Ministry of Health and then had to print retractions. But then they would go back to that well and do it again and again and again. So we know that there was a lot of trickery going on in what was happening. What have we learned since then? Like what does that conflict look now that we've had time to clear the rubble out, count people, and see what happened?
Well, I mean, the lies have gotten even crazier. And yeah, that war was defined. There's an old line: the first casualty of warfare is truth. And this is one of the most extreme examples of it I've ever seen. This is a Middle Eastern conflict where everyone has pretty good games. So, both sides were saying some pretty wild things, and, allies of each, the Houthi pirates and so on were chipping in with different bullshit and were filming rap videos themselves, attacking ships with javelins and so on. I obviously I'm pro-Israel. I'd say that Hamas distinguished itself with an unusual, even by military standards, amount of bullshit. And they're continuing that right now. I mean, so a couple of days ago, we saw the claim released by, again, the thing with Hamas is that they are, in addition to being a radical group and a reasonably effective military, they also have all these subsidiaries that present themselves as kind of reputable and public facing. So, for example, there's the Gaza Ministry of Health, which is just Hamas. It's former radical men and women that have gone to medical school or become nurses or something that release these statistics. So we've seen them claim, for example, every death that occurred during the time of the 2-year-long war was caused by Israel. You have UNRWA, if I'm saying that correctly, UN Refugee Watch, which is an organization specifically dedicated to monitoring the well-being of quote-unquote Palestinian refugees. But that's a really unique population. Like a Palestinian refugee is considered to be anyone who is descended from anyone who fled the first Israel-Arab War in 1948. So like when people use the term refugee camp to refer to the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, I mean, a lot of these are by this point well-established cities with 10-story concrete-based buildings in them. But anyway, we saw the other day, it actually was the Gaza Health Ministry released this set of stats where they claimed that the war didn't kill 68,000 people, which is the consensus from the UN, pretty much everyone that's looked at the situation. It killed 680 or 690,000 people, and 380,000 of them were babies. I think the claim was that 489,000 of them were underage, and which is defined as like 16 over there. And the argument, the claim is just complete bullshit. Like prior to the war, there were only 330,000 infant under 5 children in the Gaza Strip in the first place. So there were like 326,000 left. Like it's a tragedy that 3,000 or 4,000 of these young people were killed. Lovely kids and all that, but the argument that they're making is that all of them plus some other people were killed during the fighting. That's just not true. So yeah, this is just another example of the type of nonsense that we've seen throughout this conflict. We've seen in particular from Hamas, and it's just a funny example. And I think that's why it's going kind of viral on the right.
Yeah, I mean, how many times are we going to listen to the Ministry of Health from Hamas? I mean, again, they have proven over and over and over again. And if anything, here's what I've learned from those folks: if there are 5,000 dead babies or kids, over half of them are going to belong to Hamas, because that's usually what happens. Is like, oh, that was our rocket. That comes out later on, right? So that's how come? Why is it that we can't wrap our heads around this? And we're just talking Ministry of Health. You put any other conflict in, and all of a sudden, like, what information can I trust?
Yeah, well, I mean, most information that comes out of war zones is extremely unreliable. Like, I almost never give our Russia-Ukraine casualty figures because I don't really think we know them. We see
Right.
totally different claims from the two belligerents, and you'll see these figures that range. I think Ukraine will sometimes say things like 200,000 to a million, and you're looking at this like, well, that's actually a pretty big difference, guys. So it's hard to distinguish a killed person from an injured person on a battlefield. You understand that the official tolls that come from your opponent are often lies, so on down the line. But yeah, I mean, even in that information environment, yeah, Hamas distinguishes itself. And I think Hamas distinguishes itself because they're not trying to minimize their casualties or maximize the opposition death toll or something like that. They're just openly lying. Like, they don't care what the truth is. So I mean, when I described the technique they used once, like, they literally described everyone that died during the time of the war as being a casualty of the war. I mean, that's something I've never seen anyone do before. So like, people noticed this because I guess if you go back to the original Excel or status spreadsheets from them, there aren't any natural deaths listed.
Right.
So every single person is listed as being killed by the Zionist regime or whatever their term is. And I'm sure there's some technical mistake I'm making there about the stats software that was used, but this is actually a thing that happened. There were no natural deaths in Gaza for 2 years. So when you actually unpack the actual death toll is like 70,000, and that includes everyone that died from any cause, like heart disease, during the period they were fighting Israel. And you made a good point here, which is that a lot of those people died because of Hamas's half-assed military techniques where they don't really care who they kill. I mean, they'll
Right.
set up a fire team in a graveyard, will fire 10 missiles at urban Israel. And by this point, they can shoot pretty well. So 8 of them will hit urban Israel, but 2 of them will fall short and they'll just drop into Gaza. And Gaza is a very densely populated area. So what happens? Well, those kill whatever number of people. No one knows because they're never listed as, Hamas friendly fire. It would invariably be presented as the Israelis bombed this home and killed this sweet, innocent child, Faoud. And you'd have this crowd of people outside crying and wailing and holding up, severed arms. So, I don't want to sound entirely unsympathetic, but like, once you understand what's going on, and once you have a background, which we both do, in kind of third world bullshit, the thing itself, like, you kind of see what this is. And I think a lot of Americans, like Miss Rachel type people watching this, don't have a background in third world bullshit. So they're just looking at this and they're seeing like the severed arm in front of the burnt house. And they're asking, what kind of demonic monsters could look at this and laugh? And any former soldier, international business person or whatever is saying, like, I'm kind of chuckling because I know this isn't real.
Right.
Like, those bullet holes and the stucco in the back, like, they've been there for 10 years. Like, you can tell there's erosion on the sides. Like, there's a lot that's going on here.
Yeah, you said a lot right there.
Yeah.
I mean, oh my gosh, yeah. And then that bleeds all the way into Dave Chappelle's current, comedy special, right? He closes on a hard hit against Israel because, this stuff at some level, and Dave Chappelle's smart. He's cagey. He understands who we all are, and then he comes after Israel with this thing in his special. So think about the impact that has. That Hamas messaging only has to work at that level to get to a Dave Chappelle to get him to put that out to, I don't know, 100 million people.
Yeah, I think that it's been very effective. And the crazy thing about Hamas is that Hamas is an incredibly unsympathetic organization.
Oof.
I mean, like, something that people tend to forget is that Hamas started the war.
Yeah.
So Israel and the Arabs both have, done their dirt in the past. There, blows on both sides. But there was a reasonably honorable ceasefire that was negotiated immediately before the start of this war. Like, they weren't fighting at all. Even the second Intifada had been over for 10 years. So there is no war. There's a time of peace. If you look at the pictures of Gaza from before the conflict, people can do all this like it's an open air concentration camp nonsense, but you see beaches and like streets lined with palm trees and so on. So Hamas destroyed that equilibrium by launching what they call the Al-Aqsa flood, where they broke the border, and they did it actually pretty effectively. They had paragliders, they had hackers attack the Israeli infotech that was protecting it. They go through, they're attacking these kibbutzim, they are attacking these music festivals. They kill and rape hundreds of people at a music festival. And there's no doubting this anymore. I mean, there are movies that have been made out of these atrocities. They're fucking setting cars on fire. There are lines of people raping women. I mean, they're shooting people in the head. There's a scene this was uploaded to Telegram and Facebook where they behead a Thai gardener with a shovel. So all this goes on, and that's what starts the war. And the Israelis retaliate brutally but effectively, as they should. And that's how the conflict began. So these are the people that the people on the left are cheering for. They're also, of course, I mean, Hamas is not a feminist group. In the Gaza Strip, you've got a pretty traditional Muslim politics. Men are in charge of everything. Hamas is a dictatorship. There hasn't been an election since they last got elected in 2006. Hamas isn't pro-gay or LGBT or queer or whatever term you're now supposed to use. They throw people off buildings for advanced homosexuality. Like, there actually are legal prohibitions on a lot of this stuff. So the idea that you can get these people to cheer for this stuff by, and Brad Hutchings chipping in, it's like our cultural version of third wave feminism is the bear. Well, I think the difference is that political Islamism is actually real. Like, the whole thing with the feminists saying, I choose the bear. The bear is an artificial threat that's used to contrast with men. I mean, the West versus Islam. I mean, Islam is actually an alternative system that in some ways works pretty well. It keeps crime down. But in terms of anything that an American lib would criticize the USA for, Hamas is far worse. So anyway, it is weird that you've got like the Dave Chappelle's out there smoking one joint on stage like a 1920s jazz musician and like lazily riffing on the Jews. It is weird they have that amount of soft power.
Yeah. Well, and then I don't know if you saw that news, but that baseball prospect kid went and burned down a synagogue and fucked his whole entire life up. I mean, that's the negative side of this thing when people get captured by this, right? And again, this goes back to, I don't want to say the New York Times, pick any newspaper, any news outlet you want, that sure, they do their due diligence and they apologize for that, but then they come back to that same poison well and spread it, and it ruins people's lives. And so where's the culpability there? Is the culpability in the free market and we stop consuming New York Times or Washington Post or CBS News or whatever it's going to be? Do we give them a chance when they try to rehabilitate? I don't know that I will.
Well, I don't read a lot of mainstream national media. I do read the New York Times because it is, I mean, probably it's not, I don't know if I'd call it the best newspaper in the country. I think the Wall Street Journal is more to the right and is overall a better paper. But I mean, the Chicago Tribune's right up there. But I mean, the New York Times is a good summary of American center-left thought, and they have some good writers over there.
Sure,
but,
yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, but no, I don't think that I'm gonna ever return to like trusting those guys, even to the degree that I did as a college freshman or something like that. With the baseball prospect, I don't know if that's their team's fault though, because the Jew hate thing has become a weird horseshoe. And if you talk to people that are Jewish and that are tribally Jewish and that they're very proud of the Jewish community, they worry a lot about issues that affect Jews as Jews, like Susie Shofar or Barry Weiss. I mean, they're very aware of the directions that this is coming from. I think there are a couple of groups that kind of feel this way, actually, like Indian Americans, Black conservatives, maybe even sexual white women would come to mind. But like where you're kind of getting it from all directions. Like there's not really a group of people in terms of the political parties that's on your team. But like the guy that set the synagogue on fire was a young male bro who leaned to the right. And that might be more like the Nick Fuentes, Sneeko kind of clavicular influence. Like, did you see the video of all those guys going to the club, like playing Heil Hitler?
No. Jesus Christ.
Yeah, this is something that went viral on the right a couple of days ago. Like, there are all these weird male influencers right now. So Nick Fuentes, obviously everyone knows him. He's like the 5'7" Mexican, allegedly bisexual, would-be neo-Nazi. I don't know how seriously he actually takes some of that stuff because, I mean, he is a Hispanic guy, but very, very America First dude. You have Myron Gaines, who's another one of these. He's a guy from Fresh and Fit. He founded Fresh and Fit. But I mean, this guy, again, he's a black dude from Senegal. So I don't know where all the white power sort of stuff comes from. But Andrew Tate, Tristan Tate, somebody else, this guy named Clavicular, who's a weird dude. I mean, he's a guy who apparently he started the looks maxing trend among younger men, like try to look as hot as possible, get girls. And some of it's healthy, like you just go to the gym, you work out hard, you beat your max. But he also apparently started taking crystal meth so he could slim down.
Oh, Jesus.
At one point, he broke his jawbone with a hammer. Like, he's got this weird sort of like men's fitness pod. Anyway, but all these guys were going clubbing in Miami and they started playing the Kanye West song Heil Hitler and talking about Jews in the van. So they weren't talking about, bitches. They were talking about like the Hebrews, like the people with the little hats. So I think that you are seeing a lot of this among young men where people will casually use the term goy, like eat your goy biscuit, meaning like you're not wealthy yet. Like here's a energy bar if we're going to go play basketball or something, because you're still in that group of, poverty influenced people that aren't at the Jew level. And all the anti-Jew stuff is as prevalent on the right as it is on the left. And to me, last thing, because I can go into these long rambles, but like anti-Semitism to me, like Jews are kind of the mind canary. Middleman minorities, and I know you've read at least as much Tom Sowell as I have. Middleman minorities are actually a thing that's very common across successful societies in general. And a middleman minority is a group of smart, generally battle-skilled people that have a particular ability. They're good in the field of business and can kind of transfer money between populations. So when whites and blacks hated each other and whites had more money, Jews managed the apartment buildings in rising middle-class black communities, like they ran Sugar Hill and Harlem and so on. So that's a middleman group. And middleman minorities, because they make a lot of money at the intersections, have always been the subject of prejudice. Like the idea of giving credit, charging interest. It's very easy to say, well, you're not doing anything. What did you add to the transaction? And in fact, the thing is, if like the white guy and the black guy can't be in the same room without fighting, what you added to the transaction is that there is a fucking transaction. Otherwise, like without you, there's no business that's done. But for either of the two guys that are making less than you, it's quite easy to just ignore that and say, well, we would have worked it out somehow. We didn't need that Hebrew. So Jews are the ultimate middleman minority. And when social relations start to break down in societies, you see attacks on middleman minorities. Anti-Semitism is kind of the oldest and ugliest example of that. So when you see a lot of anti-Semitism on the left, it tends to predict like collapsing unions, rising communism. When you see it on the right, it tends to predict like racial ugliness in general, at least interest in fascism. And right now we're seeing a lot of anti-Semitism on all sides.
Yeah. Boy, you have said a whole bunch of that, and you're right. The race to wave your flag that you are an anti-Semite too seems to be curiously dangerous to one's own, production and well-being. I don't understand why people are so desperate to say, "Please, I hate Jews. Please, me, see me." And it's like, hey, I mean, how many people have lost their jobs with that? And how do you not expect to lose your job if you put this volunteer? You have so much in you, in your well of hate, that you have to vomit your hate for Jews all over the place, and then you lose your career, at least temporarily.
Yeah, I mean, I would encourage people not to go out and publicly say, I hate Jews. Yeah. There are some interesting issues about free speech in general. I mean, apparently someone recently contacted my university and complained about some of my comments on Twitter, actually. So there is kind of that, like, what's the line sort of question. I mean, I think you can talk about pretty much anything, but like we've both been bosses. Yeah, if someone says, I openly hate Mexicans or something, and yeah,
Right.
you're probably not gonna keep them working there.
Yeah. I know in my former line of work, you can't go run around Shakeville and say shit about shakes. I mean, in fact, you don't get involved in their petty stuff when they're shake on shake violence and conversation. You just kind of sit back and let them do that because people get killed for that shit, right? And so the consequences aren't just losing your job, And so if I'm working with somebody else and they're acting in a way that is drawing attention to us in the negative way, it's like, hey, knock that shit off. Like we're on the field here, people are there's no flag for spearing, like you got to take it seriously. And maybe that's a good thing that we don't have these kind of consequences in regular life, but maybe folks don't get that other folks play for keeps. Even in our little world, folks were like, yeah, all right, um, whatever. There's a great line in Unforgiven where the sheriff who has English Bob in jail, and he's talking about the Duck of Death, and the guy corrects him. It's the Duke of Death, and he's like, "Duck," I says. Well, there you go. Now you can challenge the Little Bill. Now you can challenge Little Bill and see how it goes, right? And so we all have that ability. And again, this goes back to the whole thing of why would you volunteer to go up against Little Bill if you didn't have to?
True.
Yeah. What else is interesting to you? I mean, there's all kinds of things going. Okay, let me ask you about this because this is Donald Trump makes people uncomfortable. Part of his strategy is to make people uncomfortable, and then he gets whatever he gets out of that. We were trying to have a guy on who was written a book about FDR. We are still evaluating FDR. Gosh, going to be a better part of 100 years now, right? Later, do we even know how successful or unsuccessful Donald Trump is? Is it possible to even know that?
Well, I think there are two levels to analysis. Like the short answer would be no.
Okay.
Because it's very hard in your era to get rid of your partisan biases, I think. The best analyses of presidents come years down the road when the issues of the time seem pretty much done with. Like you don't have wigs anymore. So you can look back at the context of that previous time and say, well, in an era when you had Whigs versus Federalists and when the constraints on the debate were X and Y, this candidate did pretty well. So, I mean, I think with like Thomas Jefferson, the verdict's pretty much in. Like he was kind of decadent, but he was a very good president. We've all accepted that slavery is bad. Having mistresses is bad. We also now, though, we've seen through the excuses, and we know that almost all wealthy men in that era had mistresses, that slavery was universal. That's no longer really contested. So we can look at the decisions made by Jefferson, the things that led to the Louisiana Purchase and so on. And we can say, well, putting aside the quote unquote moral debate, a word I still usually put the bunny ears on, he was one of the top 5 presidents. With Donald Trump, that's going to be pretty difficult because we're still in the world of Republicans and Democrats. And we still haven't seen the conclusion of some of the debates that Trump is involved in. So one of the things that determines whether or not ending illegal immigration or large-scale male minority immigration is good, one of the things that determines that is how well it turns out, right? Yeah. So we actually know that Irish, Italian, so on immigration, that teetered on the fence in terms of whether it would greatly change the character of the country. But those boys ended up assimilating. For that matter, so did Black West Africans and West Indians. I mean, West Indian Jamaicans and all that have one of the higher incomes in the country, or one of the higher levels of education. They have about an average income. So that last wave of immigration where people are talking about like the barefooted Irishmen fighting for the North and the Sicilian bandits and the dreadlock Jamaicans and it went on and on, right? The Chinamen, like all those people assimilated and became Americans. They built the railroads and, a generation after coming in, and then they went to college, really. I mean, even during a period of peak racism, we had HBCUs. There were schools available to most of them by that point. And then their kids became dentists and they just became boring Americans. So will that happen with another generation of Hispanics? I don't know about Somali, but I mean, like even Somalis, like, the new generation of whites, Ukrainians. I'm inclined to say yes, actually, but that remains to be seen. So, and there's also the question of will it happen in the context of woke, where people are taught that the USA is a bad country very often rather than a good one. That is a huge difference. That's a big elephant in the room. Will it happen in the context of a welfare state? Because remember, in the past, it was a sucky 6-week trip, but you could just go back home. If you didn't make it here, there was no welfare. You were just living in Little Italy in a slum apartment. You can go back home and be a farmer. And a lot of people did. About a third of immigrants returned. So in this new environment, what will happen with the immigration debate that Trump is fighting in and so on? So I don't really think the verdict is in on him yet. I tend to think that Trump is a pretty good president, though. I mean, a lot of the things that Trump is doing, like pursuing a lot of the things that he's doing that actually matter, like pursuing nuclear and fossil fuel independence, pursuing kind of a rough peace with the North Koreans, pursuing the Abraham Accords. Trump was a big voice behind that. Helping the Iranian protesters, even to the extent that he did, and certainly taking out their nuclear bomb facility. I mean, those are actually pretty big actions. So when people kind of look past that at the stupid stuff, like him arguing with the Europeans on stage about, we have the bigger dick, we'll take over Greenland. I think that that's not necessarily going to be what Trump is remembered for. And the woke stuff, like the things people are offended by today, I don't think are going to have much to do with the morality of the future. In Jefferson's time or Washington's time, people are offended by a whole range of different stuff. Was someone a coward who refused to fight duels? Did someone have an ugly wife? Like, none of that has really come down to us through history at all. So like Trump making a joke about Hispanics, I think we'll be seen as people who live in a hypersensitive era. And I think it'll be viewed as much more important that the president avoided a war with an East Asian nuclear power than that he used a derogatory term or he brought up the IQ of a poor country or something like that. But in terms of his actual policy, I don't think the verdict is fully in. No.
And it's also true that even if we all remembered, would be pretty remarkable as any kind of an era. I mean, I don't know that I could name 10 eras, right? Most people certainly can't name even 40 presidents, let alone all of the presidents, and then to talk intelligently about any of them, or the Secretary of War, or the Secretary of Commerce, or anything. We have no fucking clue what any of these people did or how to rate them. We just can maybe name some names. And we become, in our time, like all times, you become precious to your time. Oh, this is the worst time ever. It's like, well, I mean, there's not a revolutionary war going on, so there's that. There's a lot of benefits to this time. So, I mean, what actually even matters, right? And will Donald Trump be remembered? I mean, who's going to talk intelligently about, I don't know, the Polk administration? As good as it might have been, can you say 27 facts about James K. Polk? Probably not. So all this stuff ultimately does get forgotten.
Yeah. And I don't think the average person, we've only had 47 presidents, as you know. So I don't think the average person could name 30 or 40 presidents. I think you're giving them a lot of leeway there. I think the average person could name maybe 10. And I think this is actually important when people, like the last couple of presidents weren't necessarily all that great. But when people say Biden or Trump is one of the worst presidents of all time, I mean, no, I don't think that's true. Like we've had presidents. We recently had Daryl Davis on my podcast, Cut the Bull.
Yeah.
And myself and Brooks and the team we were all talking to him, Charles Love, Christie. And Daryl Davis was like, he's a little to the left of me, but he made the point, remember, we've actually had presidents that were in the Klan. Like Woodrow Wilson was, he's watching Birth of a Nation in the White House, sipping neat bourbon. We've had presidents that, like I said, were not president at the time, but fought duels with people that had. And John F. Kennedy had multiple mistresses in the White House under the desk. We had presidents beat their wives. We had presidents that were so gluttonous they couldn't fit in the bathtub. History's a long time. So when you say, Trump is no president's ever acted like Trump did. I mean, Lyndon Baines Johnson made reporters interview him while he was on the toilet. Like it's absolutely not true that Trump is the crudest or the physically toughest or whatever of the U.S. presidents. We just don't remember most of the presidents. I mean, Andrew Jackson was fighting, Native American Indians with a hatchet. And I greatly admire Old Hickory, but it's just most people don't know that. Most people don't really have a coherent sense of what these boys look like over time, going back to the start of the country.
Yeah, yeah. Hey, we're going to go back to immigration real quick. Is it a default thing that the Issei Nisei Sensei kind of multi-generational, move towards the U.S. with immigrant kids? Is that not just, is that a Japanese thing, or is that a pretty universal thing where, like, right now we're worried about, the Arabs and all the Arabs that are all here in Dearborn, Michigan. We all know to say those words. But isn't it true that 2 or 3 generations from now, those will be Americans? So much so that if they were to go back to fill in the blank Arab country, they'd be like, "You're an American, dude. You're not one of us."
I think so. I mean, like I recently I'm a sports fan. I'll watch college and even high school ball in the Midwest. And I recently saw like the recruiting video for one of it's like the prep school or magnet school or whatever in Dearborn. They're trying to get some football players. I think you actually saw this as well. But I mean, it was like the video was all Arab kids except for like a blonde and a black guy. But it was just an American video. It was like cheerleaders out there bouncing and, the players were the QB was throwing 40-yard spirals and they were talking trash, like running toward the goal line. It was like, do you have what it takes to play for the, mighty dancing dragons? Like there were a couple of Muslim references. Like, for example, you could see the players eating and it was dusk. And that's probably because Ramadan falls during the football season and they want to encourage dads. Like, we're not going to take religion away from your boy. But it was that very subtle, oblique stuff. And I would suspect someone's blonde cheerleader girlfriend would smuggle him some, electrolytes or whatever during the day. And so, yeah, you're already seeing that. You're already seeing that Americanogenesis. And in a working class community, that's pretty much what everything's like. Like, I mean, I live in the Kentucky state capital. I've also lived in suburban Louisville. And while people are having these hysterics in like Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, most people in just kind of a blue collar but well-paid community are kind of just getting along. Like actual Hispanic immigrants. If I go to Brooks's gym out in Shelbyville, I mean, probably a fifth of the people there are just normal Mexican guys, and they tend to be little, but they're cock diesel and on a box. They just get along with everybody else. And you'll teach them a little bit of English. They'll teach you a little bit of Spanish. You have the food trucks now selling tacos. And I would bet the son of that guy is probably not going to play some football unless he puts on a few pounds. But he's play soccer, start for the varsity. He's going to be a guy. Yeah. I actually, one final comment there. The Dearborn guys, they're acclimating well. But an advantage the USA has actually is that the nearest large population of immigrants is, and my Spanish buddies will get annoyed by this, but our cousins are our little brothers. Like they're not an ancient rival society. You go to Mexico, it's just like America with a slightly different skin tone. People eat tacos instead of sandwiches, but they're Catholic churches everywhere. It's a football pitch instead of a basketball palazzo, but it's the same thing. It's in the middle of a park. The marriages are so common that people joke about big booty Latinas and so on online. So that's the population that's coming into the USA. I think tested IQ, not that I'm one of these obsessives, but it's like 95 or 96 in Mexico right now. So there's not a massive cultural clash necessarily. Again, I think the two biggest problems when it comes to immigration, and this is why I'm a bit of I'm on the ISIS side in Minneapolis. I mean, I think you probably are beating some people up after a day of getting yelled at and pelted with bottles of piss and so on. But I mean, like general, I support their mission. The reason I'm a bit of an immigration hardliner is one, we have a welfare state. Yeah. So we're letting in great guys from Mexico, so on. But you're a great guy. You come here, you're a dog's body junior carpenter. That still means you're going to be on welfare for 2 generations. So that has to be acknowledged. Like there has to be some way we deal with that. We can't just say we're going to admit people from every friendly country and subsidize them for 60 years. That doesn't make any sense. Right. We're already $40 trillion over budget. That's our debt.
Yeah.
So that's point one. There's no way to get around that as much as you might want to. Even I kind of want to. Point two is the whole woke thing. And this is sometimes treated by like my Hispanic friends or by like, Irish American nurses I've dated, this kind of thing is like, oh, well, you college boys shut up about that. But no, like the schools teach a curriculum that begins with, Columbus got lost and conquered heaven. The idea is that we are these wicked people that took over paradise And you're telling this to a guy whose ancestors are from the Aztec side of the society that was here. And this is one of the ways you're getting this alienated kind of demi-monde of people that are even angrier than Black or Italian or whatever Americans. And that's a really stupid thing to do. So that's the second problem. Do we want a large population of angry, quote unquote, minority immigrants? Because with either Hispanics or Muslims, it would be very easy to get that. And for me, this is kind of a joke because like most Hispanic immigrants to the USA are clearly like 80% of Spanish descent. Like lighter than me, long hair. Like you guys, you don't have jade plugs through your nose. Like you don't know a thing about Aztec culture. You speak English and Spanish. But we have singled this group out and said, you are in one of our minority communities. This is a community that gets free benefits. And as long as you pretend to be aggrieved, these benefits will keep coming. And that's a really dumb thing to say.
Yeah, boy, that was great, man. I love that. I was thinking about a post I saw earlier today on X, and I was like, it's kind of like the conversation about Greenland and the maps of America and everything else. And they were saying that you should show this map, and it was like a map of Indian territories. And I always think like I love the old maps to look at them and be like, that's what the world was like then. But it's more adorable than it is, meaningful. I don't care where the Creeks lived in 1818. It doesn't really mean anything. The world has changed so much since then. And I don't know. I just don't get too invested in that kind of stuff because it's just, this whole thing about, Columbus found heaven because when he got lost. Go read Cabeza de Vaca's book about how hard it was for the Indians then to live. It's remarkable that they survived. They would go out and move with like the prickly pear harvest. They would go move there, and they had slaves. These were not people that were thriving. They weren't magical. They were on the edge of survival, quite a lot of them, and they were trying not to get into fights that they couldn't handle too. By the way, because they didn't have modern things. It's amazing how simple their lives were, and have no relevance to what we do today. Even today, if you had a tent, you would be ahead of a lot of people from ancient times because they just didn't have all of these abilities to put linen together in a lot of places in the world. All right, so I'll shut up about all that, but just we get awful precious about Indians and what they could accomplish.
No, I think that's a good point. Like I think that the other day I got some beef on social media for posting that everyone's ancestors were primitive savages, because like my black buddies and white buddies were arguing about this, and so the actual quote that started the conversation was somebody posted, is Emil Kierkegaard, the heterodox scientist, posted a picture of a hut in Africa, and he was like, this is what Hotep, like pro-black people, actually want to go back to. But then he posted a picture of a hut in Europe, and he's on the hard right, so he's kind of making fun of himself. But he was like, now this is the much better hut that we pro-Odin pagans want to go back to. And it was like one of those like northern places people in Finland and so on are still living today with like a reindeer and hide roof. And I shared this and I was like, yeah, this is pretty much correct. Like a friend of mine once commented that Afrocentrism, wanting to go back to Africa, can be summed up as ooga booga, but wanting to go back to like European Norse paganism can be summed up as like ooga booga plus Odin. And I think that's pretty much correct. And then I said, in reality, everyone's ancestors were savages until pretty recently. Like if you look up thatch roof in England which is the richest country in the world at the time, until 1900, people were making their roofs out of grass. So you'd have these adobe walled houses. Adobe is dirt. You pack the dirt together in a mold, and then you'd have the village thatcher put your roof together using marsh grass, and that's where you'd live in England outside of like London. And that's pretty much what they're still doing in Africa and Kenya and so on. And you can have a beautiful house. Like they'll carve stylized Maasai patterns into the house and so on. But like you don't want it to rain too hard, And I mean that was all of human history. So when you say, like they didn't have linen, the natives did have cotton, by the way. They had cloth that was at close to the same level. But like when they didn't have linen, they didn't have silk. It was hard to make quality tents. Parachutes, but you didn't need parachutes because you didn't have planes or gliders. I mean, like nothing that we take for granted existed. The thing that shocked me the most when I looked at this historically was that the Aztecs never had the wheelbarrow.
Yeah, crazy, right?
Yeah, so but so when they dug their monumental works, like the Aztecs had great canals, like when they dug those, like everybody just had to carry armfuls of dirt or fill up buckets. So like there were no bins that could carry 100 pounds of dirt. So everyone literally was like holding a bucket in each hand, like walking to the ocean and dumping the bucket in. So like everyone was pretty barbaric by any modern standard until very recently.
Yeah. Well, and if you don't have draft animals, you have a tent. It's like, well, someone's got to carry that fucking thing. Like, it becomes kind of a dumb thing to carry around. Anyway, so I wanted to ask you also, when President Trump does his churning of things, going after Europe and England and trying to get better deals and everything, and I get like part of the deal and all that stuff, but he's also bleeding political capital. This ICE thing is costing him a lot of attention, and he's got to have people win seats. And there's no heck. I would say it's unexpected that the Republicans would hold the House or hold Congress in general, and that would basically shut down the rest of his presidency. So does he have to just chop wood now while he has the power to do it, or is he even worried? Is he even worried about that? Because it's one thing to perform. Okay, let's say that the economy continues to be great and go in the right direction. That doesn't mean you're going to get reelected. Doesn't mean that in his case, he wouldn't get reelected, but that doesn't mean that you get to keep Congress and get to keep going in the right direction.
Well, I think, I think immigration is something Trump actually believes in, to the same extent I do. I think Trump, one of the advantages of being a confident and aggressive person, and one of the things that can make you an actual change maker, is being able to see obvious reality. So like in every society, there's Maya, there's the smoke screen of things that is conventionally polite to believe that become an illusion that most people aren't aggressive or confident enough to see through. I think you and I at a lower level than Trump both are confident and aggressive enough to see through it. But I mean, we're not president, so whatever. But like when you actually are at that position where you can see reality and say it, you can make things happen. And I think Trump was one of those guys who saw, look, kind of what we just said, like we're letting in at the time when he first ran against Clinton, maybe 2 million people a year, half of them illegally, to a society where we have all these problems with the current ethnic and social mix. And we're telling them that society is bad. This doesn't make any sense at all. We should stop at least the illegal portion of this immigration. And Trump's been very consistent with this ever since. If you read anything from his kind of quasi interviews in Adios America to his remarks on immigration today, they're very, very stable. That's the one thing he's been extremely just one straight line on. So I think that Trump means what he says on that. In terms of, and I agree with Trump. I mean, like when you look at the immigration numbers this year, this is the first year in something like 15 that we've had net negative migration. And all that means is that if you look at the number of people that have come into the country, minus the number of people that have left the country as H-1Bs are allowed to expire, as people are deported, so on, it's slightly negative. It's what you'd want to see if you already have 350 million people. Under Joe Biden, you saw a shocking reverse of that, where in a typical year, you'd have about 2 million people positively added to the U.S. population. And what Biden was doing, and I understand Fox and OAN sometimes exaggerate this, but my understanding of this is literally just that people would come to the border and they would say bullshit. They would say, like, I am a refugee. And Biden would let them into the country and give them a date in like 2 years for their asylum application to be processed. And this is almost certainly illegal and certainly unethical for obvious reasons. Like if you look at Mexico or Poland or El Salvador under Mr. Bukele or Jamaica or Nigeria or South Korea, I mean, like there aren't any wars in these countries. Some of them are first world countries. India, there's obviously people from these places are coming to the USA as economic migrants. Obviously, when we actually look at what happens in these hearings, when people actually go, 70 or 80% of the asylum applications are completely fake. So this was just allowed. And the sort of people on the lib side of the fence would just say, well, there's nothing we can do. They're just using the application process fairly. And what Trump said is this is complete bullshit. They're easy, obvious things we could do. We could adopt a remain in Mexico policy, for example, which, as I understand, is back, where if you want to fill out your fake application, you have to stay in Mexico to do it. You have to remain in like a designated zone in a friendly country to fill this out. First safe country policy for asylum. If you are actually a refugee, you can't claim asylum if you've passed through 10 countries to do it. You can't pick which country you want to stay in as an asylee, and so on and so on and so on. I mean, so anyway, I think Trump means what he's saying on immigration to the extent a politician means anything. Will it cost him the midterm election? I mean, I think since we both probably are going to vote GOP, are going to lose the midterms. And I mean, then the question is, the U.S. government is designed to be deadlocked. Right. I mean, the founders didn't want it to do much. So what's going to happen? I mean, I think that the president still controls ICE. ICE is part of ICE and CBP are part of what DHS, which is part of DOJ, or DHS and DOJ are separate but co-working agencies. So, he can still send in the agents to target cities. I think he'll probably work more with red states. And that actually gets into one of the big things about this. Like when people say, well, why aren't these ICE atrocities being reported in red states? The big reason for that is that red states will simply turn over the people that Trump is chasing at the jail. Like almost all these people either have been arrested already and are being released from jail, or can easily be arrested by local police. So in like DeSantis land in Florida, the Floridians will just take the guy, they'll take him out of county, they'll give him to the feds, and the feds will ship him back to Honduras. It's really simple. In Minneapolis, they won't do that, which is why you get the ICE agents going door to door. And if they're going door to door and people like Will Stancil are following them around, blowing rape whistles and throwing bricks of ice at them, eventually you're going to get anger and you're going to get confrontations.
Yeah. Well, and if anyone had bricks of ice or drinks thrown on them, that'd be considered assault, at least. Well,
of course.
Yeah, but the authorities are forced to endure these things, and look, I get it's a problem, right? We're trying to figure it out, and I guess this all goes back to why are we so mad at ICE and not at Congress? These guys haven't figured this out. If you're going to have a policy that's going to be permissive and let people in and immigrate or become refugees or asylees, that's great. Provision it. I went down to Del Rio, Texas, when the Biden administration was there, partly because the vice president wouldn't go down there like she was supposed to go do. And I talked to the judge who ran the response. And among the other things that tiny, in terms of population, county had to deal with was providing, 100 languages worth of translators, in a town that doesn't have 7 hotels. And so he's like, yeah, we're always blowing through money that we don't have. And the federal government and the state aren't going to get along because you got guys who are cross on politics. And so he was the first guy to start busting people out of there. Like, hey, I got nowhere to put these people. Put them on a Greyhound and send them to San Antonio and let those guys who have millions of dollars more than I ever have. But and he's like, look, I'm a Democrat, but there's no plan. There's no budget. It's just left for me to deal with. And this is what I was elected for, right? And so this goes to the whole thing where Congress, they're the legislators. They write the paychecks and they pay for things. And if they're not going to provision it, why are we reelecting these people? I mean, like I think America is very pro-immigration, but we don't have to have a plan that we can sustain. We can't just let in millions of people and never do anything to. It's almost inhumane. It is inhumane to let these people go into a system. There's no system to get into, and a lot of immigrants are. I guess the nice way to say it is extra legal, right? They get by doing whatever they can to survive. So why aren't we mad at Congress?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, first of all, I think a lot of people are mad at Congress. A lot of people are mad at the government in general for this whole immigration debacle. One of the reasons that more people aren't, I think, is that this is faded in power, but we do have, maybe it was Curtis Yarvin that called this the cathedral, this kind of collusion among upper middle class thought creating agencies where you have left-wing politicians, you have the academic intellectual class, you have the acceptable media, the New York Times and so on. and they tend to promote storylines and narratives. So I think what we've gotten on immigration for most of the past decade is, these are wonderful people. They're coming here for a better life. They're all refugees. And, the brutal, filthy Republicans are trying to ship them out of this country, whatever. So Congress, whoever is fighting for more illegal aliens, is often presented as the good guy in this whole scenario, if that makes sense. And Congress really hasn't taken, much of an effective stand against this. Before Trump, almost every attempt to deal with mass migration just involved playing with numbers and admitting more aliens. So, I mean, there was a bipartisan bill a couple of years ago that sort of had caps. It was like the border would have shut down if more than 5,000 people had entered on any particular day and this kind of thing. But I think the attitude of Trump, and now the attitude of a lot of people at ICE, DHS, CBP, the BORTAC teams, is kind of, why would we let in anyone to the country illegally? Literally, all we have to do is put men on the border and they can't come in. And that's an attitude that I think strikes most people as just extremely commonsensical. And what leftists are going to do in response to this is basically what they're doing now. It's just scream like, kids in cages. They're bringing back 2018. They're bringing back 2016. The goal is to flood the zone with mostly bullshit stories about every single example of someone who is harassed by ICE at all. Like, did you see the older Asian guy who was walked outside in the cold?
No. I don't watch the news at all anymore. I gave up on that shit.
But that's a story that's all over Twitter and Facebook. There's an older Asian gentleman that refused to cooperate with ICE bravely in his own home, and he was walked outside in the cold as a punishment, and there are allegations that he was beaten. It actually turns out that what happened is that this guy was sharing a house with not one, but two wanted pedophiles, at least according to the Department of Homeland Security. So these are all three Asian men. DHS has a warrant that has a description of three Asian males between like 40 and 60, names of two of them. They're all wanted at this address. It's debatable whether or not they're all still living at this address, but this is the primary targeting address. They go to this address. They find an Asian male who's totally non-cooperative. They take him out of the house. They finally get a fingerprint or something from this guy. And it turns out it's not him. He's not the suspect. But as soon as they find this out, they put a blanket around him. They take him back in the house. The reason they're being harsh with this guy is they think he's one of these two pedophiles. This drew like a hysterical kind of, and you know exactly what I'm talking about, but like screechy white lady march. Okay. Like chicks rape whistles, all, how dare you? Blonde women were like weeping up and down the street. And the back door, the pedophile's house was broken open. I mean, they were just absolutely horrified. But all of the stories that I've seen have turned out to be something like that. But you're just going to keep pushing them out, promoting the perspective of Congress or of the activists rather than of the president and of ICE. And the goal is to have this mass of semi-corroborated rumors so that when people think about this, they'll think, well, I know there's a lot of terrible stuff going on. I've heard there's a lot of terrible stuff going on. It can't all be fake, can it? And I think that's what they're aiming at.
Yeah, boy, that's it can't all be fake, right? Yeah, I was talking with James Lindsay on the show the other day. Him and I don't know if you know Dr. Amber Britton Hale, but she's also awesome. And we were just talking about the overall, like, how do you know when you're being manipulated? And you think you're watching the news because it's called the news. But if you start to feel rage in your heart because you read 3 words of a headline and it makes you mad, like that's manipulation. Yeah. And folks don't like that. And then when you tell them, hey, you're being manipulated and it's driving you crazy, and then they act crazy, there's no telling them that they're acting crazy because they're on the crazy train and they're out of the station. Yeah. It's so what is a common person to do? You want to stay informed, but you don't want to get poisoned. And this machine right here is full of poison. So what do we do?
Well, I think just minimize time. Like I haven't looked at my phone really during this interview, this conversation. I think that's a good policy during dates, during dinners. Just put it down, avoid it. control your screen time, read a book. If you're interested in an issue that's been going on for a while, there are a lot of books on immigration that cover everything up to the past 3 months. Read one, you'll know what the issue is. So that's the main thing with control your screen time. I mean, the Jonathan Haidt's good on this. Like, you control phones and classes totally. A second thing I would say is just be aware of the more obvious patterns out there, right? So I mean, like the whole thing with ICE, the ICE apocalypse, where people are reporting all these bullshit incidents, like ICE took a 5-year-old kid into custody. Well, ICE took the 5-year-old kid into custody today because his father, who's an illegal alien, ran away when he saw ICE. Now, I would never leave my kid, but other than that, that's not even a dishonorable thing to do. Now, again, I wouldn't leave a kid. But like, his father's a wanted illegal alien. I mean, he took off when he saw the immigration authorities. But the kid was detained, and now ICE is looking for other relatives to place the kid with. Like, there's nothing. At worst, the kid will get deported with the dad. There's nothing there at all. But that's a typical story. Another story is ICE tear gassed a baby. What actually happened? Obviously, ICE is not throwing tear gas canisters at babies. They're not breaking into daycares, quality leering centers. What actually happened is that someone drove their baby to a riot. So they're trying to get down the street at best, or they're there rioting at worst. And there's a crowd of people that are fighting with a crowd of federal agents. Federal agents deploy the non-lethals. The canisters start whizzing overhead. Unfortunately, the kid gets mildly sick. I mean, there's apparently a moment where they weren't breathing well, but they're fine. That's it. The story's over. The kid did not die. They're not in the hospital still. So again, that's another story out of the way. But like, be aware that what you're seeing are a pattern of 12 or whatever overall stories. They're almost all bullshit. And they involve such minor detail in many cases because these are the best stories the activists could find nationally. That was the same thing with Black Lives Matter. Like, you heard about the same 12 cases all the time. Michael Brown, Saint Trayvon Martin, and so on. And that was a little glib. But like, Trayvon Martin was a kid who, at the time of his fight with George Zimmerman, was 17 or 18. He wasn't 12. That's when his hoodie picture was taken. He actually started the fight with Zimmerman. Like, Zimmerman was following him, which is a little weird. But Zimmerman stops. He sits down. Martin doubles back, asks him, "Hey, bro, why are you following me?" Zimmerman probably says something smart. They start beating the crap out of each other. It's two men that got in a fight. Martin's winning. Zimmerman shoots him once. Unfortunate. But I mean, like, the whole thing, these stories that don't really make much of a case at all. Jacob Blake, that rapist who went back to his victim's house. The reason we're hearing about such weak example evidence is that there's no better example evidence. So be aware of these patterns. Why am I hearing about the same stories all the time? Why are they so incredibly weak? Are there more of them? How many overall ICE stops have there been? So it might be worth doing a website for somebody out there, good senior student project, but where you keep track of all of the stops by ICE every day, and then all of the allegations of abuse. So there are 390,000 detentions, 12 million stops, 19 New York Times level allegations of abuse. I think that would probably help illustrate the point for a lot of people. But just be aware of general patterns and trends, and be aware that quantitative data is more convincing than qualitative data.
Yeah, boy, you can say that again. Sometimes qualitative data is important, though. I mean, that's where the ground truth lives, is in understanding these specific examples, right? And nobody wants a kid to get tear gassed. However, there's more to the story, and all of a sudden the ground truth takes this perception, and it's like, oh, you brought your kid to it. So I was when I was in Chico, there was a protest outside. Let's just call this a riot, because that's what it was. And my buddy and I thought, well, it's gonna be fun to go check out. It's one block over, and we're on the street of that block, and so there's couches on fire, and there's cars getting shook left and right. And maybe you've seen some of this in Chicago. And so I walk up, and I stand on the street, and I'm hands in pockets, not being a problem to anybody. My buddy's standing next to me. He's 6'6". As the cops come by, they tell us to leave. And before we could even leave, my buddy John takes one on the head from the cop. And we're like, oh, shit, we shouldn't be here. We're 19. We didn't know any better. And so we left, and we didn't come back. And he had this big, huge blast mark on his head and everything. But that was just because we were proximate to the chaos, and we had gone down there to be looky-loos, but it's not a place for looky-loos. And that's what happens when you get involved in these things. the person who's running down the street trying to enforce some kind of semblance of normalcy, they don't have time to sort this out. You shouldn't be here. We told you to leave. You aren't here, so you're going to get one. And that's, man, that's a lot to put on these folks whose lives are on the line, who are getting blocks of ice and cement milkshakes thrown at them, all that shit. Yeah, stay the fuck away. If you don't want to be involved, you don't want to get hurt, that's fine. Stay away. Yeah. What else do you want to cover before we wrap this thing up, man? I've had you for an hour, and I appreciate it. That's good. All right.
Yeah, no, I think those are pretty much the main points. What's up?
Go ahead.
No, I think those are pretty much the main points, actually. But that last point does bear repetition. Like, I was reading some things. Martin Luther King Day happened recently, actually, and obviously I wrote a piece for MLK Day. I actually did a speech at Arizona State. Shout to ASU for MLK Day. But one of the things MLK said was that there's nothing wrong with being a martyr for civil rights. I mean, I think he was to some extent. But that if you take that step, if you go into situations where you might be asked to martyr yourself, you're going to be brawling with the front line of the police in the South or something like that, understand that that's an outcome that could occur. You could be badly hurt, you could be killed, so on. I think a lot of people today sort of want the martyr's crown of thorns without any risk. So to be treated like heroes, to be viewed as these incredibly positive, impressive, productive people, but without any understanding of the fact that, yeah, of course, if you do certain things, you're taking on a certain level of, like I said, risk, of chance that you'll be harmed.
Yeah.
So obviously, like, in just terms of honor, if you cross into another country illegally, like, they have the right to throw you out. You are taking on a certain chance of pain to benefit your family. You can't be mad at them if they throw you out. If you choose to riot against the police will quite possibly beat or arrest you because you're violating public order and so on. And I think what you see with a lot of these people, like the people glued to public streets and so on, is that they expect to be allowed to endlessly interfere with everyone else with no consequences. And I don't necessarily consider this a very good shooting, but I think that this is why there's so much rage about the Renee Good shooting, because all of the people that were very upset by it that I've seen are horrified by the reality of consequence. There's this sort of shock that a young, reasonably attractive white woman could start an SUV and drive it toward a federal officer and then get shot. And I think for me, you, everyone else who's been in a reasonably dangerous situation, it's sort of like, well, what would you expect to happen? If you see a federale standing in front of your car and you stomp on the accelerator, you're playing a dangerous game. And you can't possibly expect to be allowed to play that game over and over and over with nothing happening to you. And I think an issue in our society right now is that it's full of people that genuinely do expect that. And the line from Renee Good's wife, I don't see a reason to add like sexual modifiers, but a line from Renee Good's wife really illustrates this. When after the shooting happened, the two sides of fighters, they're in the street looking at each other, and she starts screaming at the cop, "Why did you have real bullets?" And the response is, "Because I'm a fucking federal agent." I don't mean to be all that insensitive, but like, we're out here fighting you guys before we arrest these pedophiles. For either of you, like, what did you expect? What kind of arms did you expect us to have? So the people that endlessly expect a flower to come out of the barrel of the gun, I think really, really kind of are an issue. And that's kind of my final point.
A couple of years back, I was out in Texas, out by Big Bend, and my friend is a Texan. He's like, "Hey, take this route." So me and three other guys in our trucks, we took this route, and it's along the border, and then we drove up on this wonderful gravel road that goes on from Osmos. It's just Texas being Texas. It was great. And as we came over this rise, we're coming from the general direction of Mexico. We hadn't gone into Mexico, but there's the border patrol there. and they're posted up, and there's vehicles. And so as he drives by, one of them lets out after him. So I create a gap. So I'm thinking tactically too, because I don't know who these guys are. Yeah, they're in vehicles, they're properly marked, but you don't know. And so when we go to park, I stagger in behind one of the vehicles, and they come out and they have the weapons at the low ready, and they see this formation that we've also jumped into their formation. Then there's a truck behind me, and they're like, "What are you?" And the whole time you keep your hands on the wheel, you stay calm, and look. I don't want them to harm us, and they don't want us to harm them.
Yeah.
And you just act like someone who's not going to harm them, And then one guy came up and was like, "Why did you do that?" And I'm like, "Because I don't know who you guys are." He's like, "Well, we don't know who you are." And I'm like, "Yeah." And so we interspersed and we sorted it out, right? But those guys, if they felt like they needed to shoot us, they could have shot us, but we didn't pose a threat in the best way that we could while still protecting ourselves. And the simple rule for this is just Pete talking, and I don't want anybody to die. I don't like violence, but people that don't want to get shot act like it.
Yep.
Just stay calm, keep your hands visible. I'm not here to harm you. I'm glad to comply. Whatever it is, say those words, and instead of acting like a fool in front of these folks, don't hit the gas. That's going to cause a response in that person. And I don't know how many people are trained up in any federal force on what to do when a car is charging towards you. Is it a good shoot, bad shoot? Not my call. That'll get figured out later on. But don't go to another state to join a protest. Don't drive towards cops, because those things they're dangerous. If you want to keep your job in the NFL, don't cause a giant protest and expect to get your job back. I'm not saying the protest thing is wrong, that Kaepernick did, but you don't Vindman. You don't call in and tell on the boss and expect to keep your job. That just doesn't. There's consequences to all these things. I'm giving left-leaning examples, but consequences are consequences. They happen on both sides.
Yeah, I think that's a good final comment there. Like when you said if you don't want to get shot, act like it. I think that would strike a lot of people as kind of harsh or rude, but it's also very obvious advice. Like when I look for my book Taboo, I looked through all of the Black Lives Matter cases, and there were two things I took from them. Like in some of the cases, I thought the cop was at fault. Some of the cases, I thought the young brother was at fault. But the second thing that I took from them was that in every one of the cases, it would have been very, very, very easy not to get shot by the police. Like if you do basic things like don't jump out of your car and start walking toward the cop with your hunting knife, like Jacob Blake, you're not going to get shot. Like you can say, well, they had two cops there. They should have taken him down in a physical fight. Like I think cops should learn how to roll in the dojo better, sure. But that's not their job. Like their job's not to get hurt, risking tussling with you. It's incredibly easy just to stand there and say like, yes, sir, boss man. Here's my ID. Here's my union card. Like that's kind of what you're supposed to do because you're the accused criminal. You're at your ex-girl's house having a fight with her. So that second point, like all these people that keep talking about I live in terrible fear as a black man in this country, like, and the poor white guys are just as bad, but like all these people, and then the feminist women are just as bad. But all these people are talking about how horrified, afraid they are. Why are you carrying a fighting knife in your hand? Like it would be very easy to put. I have one. I don't pull it out on people unless I'm going to use it. Like, well, why do you have your bow staff? Just put all your weapons down, sit down, car door closed. It would be very, very easy for everyone just to go home. And I think that's something that's really, that is why I think the average working class male, definitely been a varsity athlete, probably been in the military, been in some fights, is so unsympathetic when they look at these videos. And I think you just made a point that I haven't heard analyzed on mainstream network television, which has a wealthier audience. You can agree that cops can be a little trigger happy and also realize I don't know anyone in the world that would act this way. And I don't think between like East Aurora hood buddies back home, Kentucky redneck buddies, veteran buddies, I don't know a single person. If you're in the middle, you're a reporter, you're watching a fight, violence on both sides between well-trained federal agents and working class Latino rioters, and both guys are really swinging their hands. If you want to be identified as a reporter, you don't want to be thought of as part of this at all. I don't know a single person that would be out there, weapons of their own, screaming, shouting, blowing rape whistle. What are you doing? You idiot. You're clearly going to get shot. Like it's obvious this is what's going to occur. So, and this again was the thing with Hamas, right? Where people kept saying, well, they're shooting people in press vests. Yeah, because you can't just write Prince on your chest and go fight. You can't have a gun as a reporter.
Yeah.
When I was in Latin America, that was one of the most basic rules. Like, if you identify as anything, like you guys are AFS, you're fucking liberal students planting your trees, you can't have weapons, you can't wear camo, you can't do any of that. Like, you just go do good. It was extremely clarified to every member of every positive aid group that was the rule. I can't imagine that's not the rule today everywhere. So that's kind of a last note from me.
All right, everybody. This is Will Reilly. You guys know what to do. You can follow him on X. He's got a great following, wonderful books. You guys can go get all of those. You know how to do all that stuff. Will, thank you very much. I'll say goodbye to you in a second. Everybody else, I'll see you all tomorrow.